Hey everyone, welcome back to CM Fab. I'm Chris, and that is my 1981 Toyota race truck build, which is now a mid-engine race truck build, I found out in this episode. Anyways, we're going to use this bender here to bend up some upper control arm mounting points, as well as some upper control arm mounting points. And then we're going to try and get our intercooler and our radiator put in, or at least mocked up. Future Chris here. Just so you guys know, there are bloopers at the end of the videos. Go ahead and stick around till you see them. Most of the time it's me getting hurt. I did this side on time lapse mainly because it was a lot of thinking and I didn't really know how I was going to do it until I started doing it. The other side has not been done yet, so I'll go ahead and talk about that more when I'm actually doing it with the tube bender and cutting and notching and all that stuff. This side, the plan was really to tie the cage back here into the frame, but still allow the cab to be removable. That's where these little guys come in right here, these tubing couplers. I'll talk about those here in a second when I do the other side. And then also provide a spot to mount the upper coilover mount there that I want to redo, and the upper control arm mounts here I want to redo and tie all into this tube structure, make it a little bit more stronger. And also when I do the manifold here, I wanted to make sure that I still had room for a collector to come out here, and then hopefully a turbo will live somewhere in this area eventually, as well as a radiator and intercooler and everything else I plan on shoving in here. And so I'm going to go ahead and tack this side up and kind of make it more permanent. That way I can copy the bends to this side and then start cutting some of this stuff out as well. All right, so the first thing I did here to get the angle of the bend on the other side, or this side, I guess they're the same. I took a piece of TIG wire again, and I held it kind of in the direction that I wanted it to go. So I knew I wanted it to tie into the upper door bar there, and then also stay level over the frame here. So I took this TIG wire and I bent it. It ended up being 45 degrees. I guess I could have just guessed, but I took that angle, bent it, and then I came over here to my fancy angle finder here that I got from Harbor Freight. And let's see if I can open this one-handed. Turn it on. And then I just matched up the angle here, matching it in there until I got the perfect angle for that bend. Took it over to the bender, threw it in here, and then got my angle for the notch. All right, I'm going to try and explain a little bit about what we're using here before I go ahead and start bending the next side of that tubing. I'm going to be using a Rogue Fab bender. It is a vertical bender. I got it 7, 8 years ago now. When I was researching benders at my last house, I couldn't fit a horizontal one in the garage just because it wasn't wide enough. And with the truck in there and the workbench and all the other things that I had in there, there just wasn't enough space to bend tube in a flat plane. So I researched, found out Rogue Fab makes a vertical one, and it got awesome reviews. So I went ahead and bought it, and it is awesome, and it still works here in this shop now that I have even higher ceilings. I can bend a full 20-foot stick of tubing if I wanted to, and not have to worry about hitting a wall or anything like that because it goes up into the air. I do have a couple different dies, but we're going to be using 1.5" for the front tubing that I'm making. It's going to be 1.5" 095 wall. In my mind, that should be strong enough. However, this is a how I do, not a how to. So if you're building something, do your research, right? Make sure it's going to be strong enough. You don't want to have something break while you're going over a rock or hitting a curb or hitting another car, right? Or upside down. That's probably the most important one. 1.5" 095 wall, and that is because I didn't want it to be too heavy. It doesn't necessarily match the cage. The cage is 1.75" 095 wall, but this isn't protecting my head, so I didn't think it needed to be that heavy duty. And then the front suspension mounts, when I tie those into this tubing as well, that'll add some strength there. I don't think the tube is gonna like snap in half or something going around the corner, or if I hit a curb or something, right, it's not gonna just snap in half. So I think this will be fine. And then I have these little tubing couplers here that act as kind of like a quick disconnect. If you've ever worked around like hydraulics or air hoses, anything like that, the ability to just quick disconnect is awesome. So they make them for tubing as well. They unbolt. That way half of this tubing can stay with the cage and then the other half can stay mounted to the suspension, and I don't have to worry about finding another way to unbolt the cage and take it off, which is important because as of right now, I don't know how the engine is going to come out or how I'm going to change spark plugs for that matter, because the engine is basically underneath the truck. So, which a friend pointed out that I guess means that it is a mid-mounted truck now, or mid-mounted engine. So I guess that's pretty cool, right? Mid-mounted Toyota pickup. Maybe that'll start getting the views. Anyways, I'll go over how the math works out on here for anybody that cares. If not, then feel free to fast forward past that part. But you do a lot of math to get your bins in the right spot. That took me a while to learn, which is also why I didn't record when I was doing the other side, just because I didn't want to mess it up too many times on camera, because that's embarrassing. But anyways, yeah, I think I'm done rambling. I'm going to go ahead and start bending the other side. Like I said, I'll go over the math on the table. That way, anybody that cares can watch it. Anybody that doesn't can fast forward past it. Get after it. All right, so I'm going to try and explain this in a way that makes sense to me, and hopefully that means it'll make sense to anybody who's watching, especially if you have a Rogue Fab bender, because I think this only applies to that bender. There are instructions on their website that probably explain it a lot better, but I figure I'm making a video, so I might as well throw this in there. So I know that I want my bend to be, the middle of my bend to be roughly 16 inches from the end of this tube. That way I have room for my tube notcher, or sorry, my notch, and then a little bit of wiggle room in case it's not the exact same as the last tube that I just bent. I probably should have measured the side that I'm doing right now, but I'll live and learn. So I want a 45-degree bend right here in this line. I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's a line right here. And then I know, because the Rogue Fab website tells me on this specific bender, every degree is going to be 0.078 of an inch of tubing used. So I want to make sure that I have enough room for the bend, basically. I want to set the start of my bend in the right spot on this bender. So I know that I'm going to use 45 degrees at 0.078 of an inch, which equals 3.5 inches. So my total bend is going to use 3.5 inches of tubing roughly. Since I know this is the middle, I'm going to divide that in half so I can only worry about the half towards the end that I need to load into the bender, which will be an inch and 1.75 inches. So I'll measure from this mark out 1.75 inches. And that's where the start of my bend will be according to this bender. Now, the spot where it actually gets clamped in the die, again, according to this bender, it says right on the side of my bender, it's 5 3/16 of an inch. So that's where my my clamp will go. So I'm going to measure again from that line out 5 3/16. And again, this is kind of a rough guesstimation just because I know I have wiggle room on my truck. If you're building it within like a super tight specification like I did with the cage actually touches both sides of the cab. I did this measurement like 400 times and still got it wrong. So just make sure you do that math a bunch of times, or at least enough until you feel confident. So there's my mark for 5 3/16. So now you can see here my original bend mark. So that's where I want the center of my bend. This is going to be that 1.75 inches of where my bend is going to start. So my bend should start right on that line. That should be the center of it. And then 1.75 inches on this would be the end. I'm not too worried about that right now. And then I know that the clamp for my bender needs to be 5 3/16 inches away from the start of my bend in order to actually work correctly. So I mark that here. So when I go to actually load the tubing into my bender over here, that clamp it's on the floor right now, but it goes in that pin, needs to be exactly on this line. That way my bend will end up right on that line. All right, I don't know if you guys can see me or see me very well, but this is that clamp block that I was talking about. Needs to be a certain distance from the end of the middle of my bend. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it on that line and tighten it down. Now the website does say that the outside of the block is where the bend, that mark should go, not the side towards the die. So again, if you're using a Rogue Fab, I need to stop saying that like I'm sponsored by them. So if you're using this bender, go ahead and, well, for one, look up the instructions online, and then you're going to put your mark on the outside of the clamp block itself. And then you'll take your tubing. Ouch. I should put this knot on the floor. Slide it through the dies. And then load it in. I should really be time-lapsing this because you guys don't want to see me crawling around on the floor. But oh well. All right, now you can see it's loose in here. I always kind of tighten it up. I don't even know if this jack is tight right now. Nope. So make sure your jack is tight. All right, so you can see there's not as much wiggle in there anymore. So to me, that means that tube is now clamped in there at 0 degrees. So I want to go up 45 from there. I have this little magnetic digital angle finder, I guess it would be called. And I'm going to have it referenced on the back side at 0. So now it says 0 here. I'm going to put it on the front side of my tubing which is also 0. And then I just bend up until I get to that 45-ish, probably a little bit more. I'll probably go to 48 degrees. That way the spring back of the tube will come back to 45 degrees. So that is 48 degrees. So I'm going to loosen it up. And if somebody that has one of these benders sees that I'm doing this wrong, please let me know down in the comment, because this is all self-taught. So I go back until it's a little bit loose again. That way I know it doesn't still have pressure. I should probably move the camera. I know that it doesn't have pressure. So that's 0. So 44.98. I think that's going to be good enough for now. So now I could let off more pressure. I need to stop wearing such tight pants. I don't know if you can see that mark right there where it says middle, right in the middle of our bend. You can see the start line is right about where it started. And then our clamp line is still on the clamp, so that's good. All right, so you can see my marks here. After the bend, that was where my clamp was. The start of the bend, you can see, is kind of right where it started touching the die. And then the middle of the bend is right where the middle of the bend is. And then again, the last half of that bend I didn't really worry about, because hopefully this lines up right over the frame. Hopefully, because I did not go back and measure it again. So we'll see if it worked. So you can see it kind of worked back there. I probably could have got away with not wasting so much tube, but once I notch that, this should line up pretty good right over the frame rail. Still have to cut out this coilover mount here just so the tubing fits down right. That's kind of how it turned out. The next step will be cutting out that coilover mount and then cutting this tube in half so it kind of matches that one over there. So before welding these bungs in here, I decided to lay them out next to each other. That way I could see how close they actually are to matching. And you can see that it's pretty close. You can see my middle bends here and my start bend there, and then the clamps over here all kind of line up. That way at least I know that they should match side to side. And then when I held it up to the truck, I know that it was pretty close to being exactly where I needed it. This will also give me a chance to mark here where the end of this tube is. That way I can have the two couplers in the exact same spot from side to side. I don't have to worry about lining those up from if I ever take the cab off or have to move anything. Next step will be to cut this bottom tube to match the top one, and then put a bend in similar to this one. I think it was 70 degrees, and then chop it off to match. And then we'll put them both back on the truck. They both fit, and I'll go ahead and weld them up. One last thing is this notch right here, I do have to make sure matches, but is opposite of this one, just so that it doesn't go up into the truck instead of down towards the frame. I've done that before where I've got the notches wrong and then I have to redo basically the whole tube. So once I cut this one short, I'll probably notch this just to make sure it fits right, and then go ahead and do the other bend. All right, so for this notch, I just took my tubing here and held it about the angle that I wanted it, and then I marked it with my marker. Granted, I'm doing this one-handed, so I can't mark it right now, and this is just scrap tubing. But I held it up there, marked it as close as I could, and then took it over to my, I don't know actually what kind of notcher that is, but it's cheap and it doesn't work very well. I took it over there and got a kind of a close notch to where it was or where it should be, and then took my angle grinder and cleaned it up. And you can kind of see it's dark, but it's a pretty good fit. I find that the easiest instead of just trying to trust the notcher itself. So this is the notcher I have. I guess it's a Woodward Fab, which is probably not too terrible. I know there's better ones out there, but again, I just use this to get a quick notch, and then I clean it up over here on the workbench with just my angle grinders. I got this side put back in. I didn't touch it at all, so it went right back in just fine. The magnets are probably not holding it in the right spot right now, but I'll worry about that when I go to weld it in. This side over here is the side that I was working on camera. You can see it's notched back there, and then I got it cut short up here. It is held in by magnets right now. That notch needs a little bit of work. It's not completely straight yet. It looks pretty close over the frame rail, but I won't know until I get the added piece put in right here. And that's up on top of the cowl right now. I still need to cut this coilover bracket here, or at least notch it like I did on this side over here, so that the tube could fit in. But I'm going to do that probably tomorrow. It's getting kind of late today, so I'm going to go ahead and call it quits and go inside and get warm, because it's a little bit cold out here. And I didn't want to turn on the heat because I'm not that smart. Anyways, before I start rambling, next time I come out here, I'm going to finish this section right here, notch out the coilover mount, and then hopefully get these all at least tacked in for now, and then we'll see about what else I'm going to do in this video. I might kind of look to see how the radiator and intercooler will fit up here. I have it over there sitting on the ground, so we'll see what it looks like in here maybe. You saw in that time lapse, I went ahead and cut out and notched these coilover brackets here, or coilover mount, to fit that tube in. And I went ahead and cleaned up that notch back there to get this tube over. Hello, Vader. Hello. What do you want? Okay. Went ahead and got this tube over the frame rail to match this side. For some reason, the second one always takes longer just to kind of get them to match. They're probably still not perfect, but at least they're about as good as I can tell by just looking at them. I'm sure if you held up some sort of fancy scientific tool, they'd probably be off a little bit, but just looking at it with the naked eye, you can't really tell a difference, and that is good enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and weld those bungs in. That way I can have my magnets back and then go on with seeing what else I'm going to do in this video. And kick this guy out of the shop here so that he does not catch fire. All right, the bungs are welded in. I'm going to go ahead and let them cool so I don't burn myself, and then move on to getting them tacked to both the frame and the cage. All right, so I finally got both tubes tacked in. As you can see, the magnet's no longer holding them up at all. This side, at first I was a little worried about some pedal clearance, but I think with the seat all the way back and a small set of pedals, there'll be plenty of room in there. The stock fender well area is not that much farther in front. And so I think with a small shoe and small pedals, I'll be fine to fit all three in there. Also, there's plenty of room between the engine and that bar for steering and everything. So we'll see. Again, it's getting very small up here very fast. On this side, I started mocking up another anti-intrusion bar. Same thing will go on this side. But I decided to wait until the cab was off just so I could fit in there easier. This one was kind of a test piece using scrap steel. You can see there that notch didn't come out quite right. There's a little bit of a gap, but that's what it'll look like. Basically to protect me from if someone hits me in this corner or I hit someone from that wheel meeting me in the face or meeting my passenger in the face if I decide to have a passenger seat. So now that those are done, I started moving on to trying to fit everything in the front of this engine bay. Both intercooler, radiator, and then hopefully I get a turbo here soon. See if that all fits in there kind of how I imagined it. I imagine them being a little bit more at an angle, maybe 45-degree angle. That way I can have an air inlet here that will go into the intercooler and then come out of the top side here of the radiator and hopefully exit out of the hood before the front of the engine. I don't know if that's possible yet. Again, the turbo is supposed to live in that same area, so we'll see. And then intercooler piping might be interesting, at least on this side. There's not a whole lot of room there. And on this side, I'm not too worried about this because I can come out of the top side of the core and go around the top of the radiator. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Again, still waiting on parts to make sure everything fits in there. This video is kind of supposed to be putting the front end together, but it ended up just being those two tubes and then a little bit of tube bending how I do and tube notching how I do. All right, I think that's going to do it for this one. I did not get as much done as I wanted to just because I was waiting on a turbo and I want to see if all that stuff fits together before I commit to making mounts for anything or a manifold or anything like that. So I didn't get as much done as I wanted to. Did get some mock-up of this stuff done. It will fit, maybe, so we'll see. Next video, either suspension mounting points off these two bars that I just built, radiator mounting points, maybe a turbo manifold, maybe something completely different. Maybe I work on the daily or the Camaro that needs work badly. So anyways, before I start rambling, please do all the YouTube things. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. What are you doing? You're a psycho. Okay, okay, okay. How much tape do you guys actually think is on here? Probably enough to hold a small person to a wall. You guys know that they're in the end of this episode. Or in any of blah, 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 blah. Vendors. They are very popular now, especially among the YouTubers that get sponsored by them. Wink, wink.